Cool. All right. So, today I'm here with Diego, Mr. Diego over here. Him and I met this guy over at the mall. I don't know what 2-3 months ago. I feel like at this point in time, and I forgot to have you put your mic back on. So, joys of doing live stuff right now. But basically, I met Diego. He's a professional DJ. He's been chasing his dreams. I wanted to sit down and have a conversation with him, hear a little bit about his story. You guys can always check him out on his Instagram and DMs and everything like that. I'll link that down in the comments and the descriptions as well, even in chat too, if you guys are curious about that. Otherwise, we'll just jump right in. Got a couple of questions that I wanted to ask him because he had a interesting past, I would say, and he's kind of like taking this whole different path around entrepreneurship and creating music and pursuing like a creative endeavor, which I think is incredibly fascinating and insightful. And I figure like these are the stories that we get to hear from other people to hopefully inspire other people to go do the exact same thing. So that's what we're going to be doing in today's episode, and we'll just kind of jump right in. Diego, I don't know if you want to tell a little bit about yourself and kind of what you have been going on with, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you want me to start from the beginning?
But might as well, dude.
Okay, so I guess where I should start is with my musical background. I started playing the piano when I was 5. I always knew music was a big part of my path. Playing the drums at 13, started getting into dance music around 18. I started DJing a few years later, and then producing about 5 years ago. As far as spirituality, because those are my two main paths. I've always been a spiritual person. I always felt very, very connected to God, if I can say the G word,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
To creator, to source, whatever you want to call it. My family is very, very spiritual. In fact, they're actually very religious. Right? I was raised Christian. Never quite resonated with the dogmatic aspects of Christianity, but I resonated heavily with the emphasis on human love and connection to spirit, and the ritualistic aspect that brought people closer together. I really resonated with that. My grandparents were always the ones to say the rosaries at the funeral. My parents are always the ones to say the prayer at the dinner table when it's all of our extended family. So there's been this consistent lineage and passing down of us being the ones who just kind of take spiritual responsibility of those around us, and I'm no different. Right? My love for dance music and DJing and my real spiritual path, I would say, they all happened in the same year. Right? So I think it was 2011, yeah. 2011, I went to my first festival. I went to EDC Las Vegas. It was the first one they had outside of LA. And I had been raving for a couple years at that point. And, it's a rave. Everybody loves raves, right? Because it's literally such a peak experience. And I remember just being in a really dark place at the time. I was really, really heavy into drugs and alcohol and partying and just wrecking my body. Wasn't really prioritizing relationships, wasn't prioritizing my health, or really anything other than partying. And, got to get it out of your system. I'm thankful I got it out of my system early, that reckless side of it. And finally, when I went to this festival, I remember something was different in the air. I just remember seeing the artists on stage performing in the way they did. I'd never seen something of that scale. I was 20 years old at the time. And just feeling the energy of the people around us, and just the energy, the vibration, the unity was so palpable and changed my brain. I remember, I was in a fraternity in college, and I was the party guy, right? I was the crazy fun one who didn't get good grades or didn't listen to anybody. But I remember after that experience, oddly enough, right, you would think that an intense party experience like that would change you for the worse, but it actually did the opposite for me. I remember after I was done, I was so inspired, right? I'm someone who's mostly driven by inspiration versus fear, thankfully. I think a lot of people nowadays especially are not that way. But I was so inspired that I was like, I want to do that. I want to be on stage, but I also want to do it in a more epic way, in a way that's a little bit more unique to my soul. You know what I mean? And I remember just wanting to level up holistically in my whole life, not just musically or artistically. remember looking around my fraternity and seeing who are the key players here in this society of men who are like prominent men on campus, getting good grades, doing big things, and they're respected. It's like I have gifts. I want to offer my gifts. And I remember I was like, well, I'm pretty deep in the party scene, and I'm not sure how to change. Like, what's a radical way that I can change? And I thought, I was like, I'll train for a fight. I'll train for a boxing match, right? I had done wrestling when I was young, so I had some martial art in my system, but I had never. I hate violence, right? Like, I never liked getting punched. I don't really like punching people, but I knew that this was so radically different from what I was used to. I figured, why don't I just do this and go all in and see what happens? I don't know what came over me, but long story short, I trained for the fight. It was about a 6-month process. Quick cold turkey, stopped drinking. I think I drank once that entire time for like Halloween or something. And I regretted it the next day at practice for sure. But I think that was the only time that I consumed any sort of substance in that 6-month process. And again, did the fight, came out the other side. I did a fantastic job. I was so proud of myself because I remember it was an amateur fight, so they pair you with whoever's in your weight class, regardless of experience. Right? So they had guys from each fraternity pair up, and I remember I got paired with another coach. Like, this dude had been boxing for a long time, years and years, and I was like so nervous going into this because I didn't want to fight someone with that as much experience. I had none, right? And I went in and I just cleaned up. In the 6 months amount of time, the dedication really showed. My whole fraternity was so proud of me. My coach was so proud of me. I was so proud of myself. I'd never worked so hard for something. My point being, when you push yourself to the limit like that, you come out on the other side a new person. It's the law, right? And my vibration was different. I had no drugs in my system. I had no, I had broken a lot of habits and broken a lot of patterns and just like really leveled up my vibration such that I was now in this kind of place of limbo. I was like, well, what am I going to do now? I finished this fight. I don't think I want to do that again, but I'm ready for something else. And it was in that space where I found tantric breathwork, or rather it found me. I had an old friend and who also became a mentor of mine who studied a sect of yoga called Kundalini Tantra. It's a very specific kind of yogic practice that's heavily focused on core strengthening and breathing, and it's very lower chakra oriented. It's very focused on rooting and grounding and strengthening, and just like total evolution. And I'm the kind of guy who's obsessive, right? I just go all in on the things that I know are for me. And it's fortunate enough that the guy I was training with was the same way. So we just went all in every day for months training. And I remember my first experience with this practice was so profound because I had never done any sort of spiritual practices before. I think I did like a P90X class, like a yoga class, you know what I mean? We were stretching, but it wasn't the same. This was my first like yogic encounter because I felt the energy. And for people like myself, and I think a lot of people in the dance music scene can resonate with this, we like intensity, right? We like intense experiences in our nervous system. I'm no different, right? I'm an intense person, and I seek intensity because I think life is intense. You got to squeeze it, right? So this particular sect of yoga offers that to you in the energetic form. It's a lot of energy. So it kind of satiates that part of you, right? And it allowed me to really rebuild my relationship with substances. So for that reason, among many others, I really took a liking to it. And I remember my first experience was so powerful. We did these ecstatic breathing practices. And I remember in like 20, 30 minutes, I was so flooded with this life force that I had to some degree known. It was like the most familiar, unfamiliar feeling I'd ever felt, right? Sober. And I remember I was so captured by this feeling that I didn't see visions of God. I didn't have orgasms in my head or anything crazy. I just had this incredible feeling of fulfillment and energy and clarity and focus. Focus has been hard for me, just like being a highly energetic, highly distractible guy. This energy gave me so much of what I felt like my brain needed and my body needed. I remember, it's gonna sound a little weird, but I remember in that moment it felt like I had all my ancestors and like my deceased relatives who had just like toiled endlessly for lifetimes, and they were all like looking down on me saying, "You found it, you found it." And I just kept hearing that, they're feeling that sensation in my body over and over again. And that was almost 13 years ago. I haven't missed a day. Every single day I've put in some sort of practice. And it resonated so quickly with me that I began taking students, began teaching classes, and I've just slowly started to refine my practices and refine my clientele and refine my output in the way that I teach. And over the years, I've been blending the two, right? The musical practices with the spiritual practices, and it's still a work in progress, right? I haven't still quite like found the formula, but what I've built so far is pretty great, I think, and it's powerful, it's fulfilling, and it keeps growing. So that's kind of like a long-winded answer to your question. How did I start and where am I now? This is where I'm at. So,
Dude, no, that's perfect, man. I know it's challenging. Meditation practices, like, they seem to come out of nowhere. I've come to realize, like, they just kind of like almost find you in a sense. And it's weird how like you had to go through those specific events and like things in order to come to the realizations that you had to.
Yeah.
So I feel like if you wouldn't have gone through those experiences, you wouldn't be where you are right now.
Right.
And I don't know if it's because I've had mystical experiences with meditation myself as well too. And sometimes it's like, it feels as if like I want to go back to that moment, but I can never fully go back to that exact same moment, sadly.
Right.
As much as we want to, but it's like we have to almost get to the lowest low in our lives to be able to get to this place. So like you were talking about the whole spirituality aspect as well too, and I like how you found like the whole dogmas with Christianity and things like that, because I myself have also run into those similar situations where I'm like, it's great, but it's also like if it's not this way, you're kind of screwed. Like if you want to think outside of the box, you're going to try things a little bit different, you're like, you can't almost.
Right.
Where it's like, but we want to share our love and we want to share our passion, we want to share the things that we want to do and like share our vibrations to hopefully raise the consciousness of everybody else. But like in certain types of industries and religions and areas, it's like it's very difficult for us to do those types of things. So it's like I was curious as to figure out like that whole training process that you went through for those 6 months, if I recall correctly. Like that whole process, like it evolved you and changed you into somebody different, it sounds like. And I feel like people that are also struggling with fitness and understand like, oh, I can't do this thing, like it's too hard for me, but like you were able to make it through.
Right.
And it sounds like, what was the thing that was keeping you moving that whole time to help you get through that process? Like, was it the fight at the end or was it something else like that kept you wanting to keep fighting through that whole journey?
Well, that's a good question. I'd say the first piece to that was the inspiration I felt leaving the festival and during the festival. That feeling was so strong, right? The yogis say that when your third eye wakes up, you have clear vision of your path and your desires and what you want and your dharma, which is different than, dogma, right? Mm-hmm. Dharma is different.
Dharma's duty, basically.
Dharma is like your path, your duty, like your divine duty. Dogma is just a set of rules that refuse to be questioned or challenged, which can be very toxic, right? When your vision is awake, willpower becomes very strong. It's according to the yogic text, right? Because you know where you're going, right? If you can see the end of the tunnel, you have more will to reach the end of the tunnel. If you have no idea what you're doing, where you're going, you can't see clearly, it's really hard to get up every day and push yourself to do things you don't want to do. It's very challenging. So in that moment when I felt that inspiration, I could see myself on the stage, doing what I wanted to do, living my life, and the vision was so clear that it drove my behavior and it drove my activity and my action. And then also I was like, well, I'm going to get in the ring and I'm going to get beat the shit out of, so I better train. You know what I mean? I also didn't want to look like a fool in front of everybody because the whole university was there. You know what I mean? So I definitely had a few things going that were motivating me to perform at my highest.
Yeah. And has your Dharma changed over the years since then?
You know, it's funny because I keep thinking that it is, and then when I really like look back at just like what my path is and who I am, it has not. It's the same. It's only refined.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is refreshing and frustrating because, you know, sometimes I get bored of the day to day, and sometimes I get anxious, feeling like I'm not doing enough. But then when I look back, and I'm like, well, you're doing it, man. Just like be present, stay the path, and keep putting in the work because the evidence is clear. Right? The growth is very, very apparent when I really look back and reflect. So Dharma hasn't changed; it's only refined.
Yeah, and what you're saying too about inspiration, it's like there's all these successful people out there. You probably know countless DJs too that they tried for 10 years or something like that, 15 years. They never got anywhere. Like they were doing shows for probably 1 to 5 people or something like that. But then all of a sudden something just clicked, and then they were big. It's just like that's the inspiration right there. And like I love those stories because it's like as long as you stay persistent and you don't give up, like I mean, you're bound to do better than you would if you would have stopped at some point in time. And I think that's where a lot of people give up because they're like, oh, it's too hard. Like, it's too challenging. And having that dharma, the duty, the thing that's bigger than yourself to kind of keep moving you forward, I found tremendous value in it. And it sounds like you have as well, too. Because otherwise, like, what we do is hard. It's incredibly difficult and challenging. But it's like we have to go through these difficult, challenging things because they shape us into the people that we are.
Correct. Speaking facts, dude. So I like what you said about the 10 years, nothing, all of a sudden something happens. Now, the time itself is irrelevant. I think that everyone has their own timeline. Some people it's more, some people it's significantly less. I know DJs who became international in 2 years, you know. And it really just depends. And I think there's this concept of the ice cube, right? And like the melting point. So you can keep an ice cube intact up to 31 point whatever degrees, right? And it won't melt. As soon as it hits 32, something happens in the chemicals and it starts melting. But nothing until that point, no matter that fluctuation between 0 and 31 or below 0, nothing happens. The ice cube remains until that millisecond, right? That microscopic or whatever the metric is to measure temperature. Once it reaches that, it starts melting. Right? And not until that point. And it's almost like you have to build yourself up as an expert in such an intense regard that you reach that melting point, that breaking point, right?
Yeah.
It's the same with any sort of pressure, right? Like a surface will crack only after a certain amount of pressure is applied. There's that fluctuation, but as soon as you cross that threshold, just a hair over that threshold, there's a crack.
Mm-hmm.
And I think success is the same way, whatever success is, you know.
Yeah.
So whatever success means. You know?
Because how would you define success for you personally then?
It's a great question. I would say success is coming through on the things you say you're going to come through for, right? Because it's really defined by you, you know what I mean? I know people who are wealthy, pretty well known on the outside. You would assume that they're successful, but they don't seem very happy, right? I don't think that's success. I think there's also other people who maybe are not as flashy, don't have the metrics there, right? The numbers, the followers, the money, but they seem pretty stoked, pretty happy, and pretty fulfilled with life. I would say that might even be more of a success than if the metrics are there. But I think success is something you define. It's basically coming through on what you say you're going to come through on. So I would say that's my definition of success.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there.
Yeah.
It's about doing what you want to do.
It's about being a creator, right? I think Hormozy said it best. He said, if the ultimate form of a creator is, I think, therefore, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is, God spoke, and in the beginning there was a word, and the word was God, and the word was made flesh.
Yeah.
Right? So if God, the creator, can speak or think or whatever, and something is instantly manifested, then we, as miniature creators, I think the best creators are the ones who say something or think a thought, and the distance between what they said or what they thought and the manifestation of that thing the shorter that distance, I think to some degree, the better of a creator you are. Right? Now, one could argue the opposite, right? If things take longer, oftentimes it's more fulfilling because you had to wait for it. You were teased along that whole journey. So it really depends. But I like to create fast, even though I don't always do it. Sometimes I'm slow, but I know that slow things manifest in time, and when they do manifest, they're almost always worth it. Especially in the musical realm, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole thing is it's the whole tortoise and the hare type of thing. It's like you're gonna win one way or another. It's just like, and the payoff, and it also depends on like the work that you want to. Because you talked about the DJs. Some DJs, they get not lucky, but they get their big break in say 2 years. But it's like you never know what their background was up until that point.
Right.
So it's like we always just only ever see the success of people and never the final, like, they'll climb up. Nobody ever shows the failures, which is kind of sad. But I wanted to circle back to the whole tantra, tomato. I'm like, I that's never been a meditation practice that I myself personally have done. But I know that you have a couple of students, if I remember correctly, too, that you actually like teach that practice with, along with you doing it yourself. So I just kind of wanted to explore that a little bit more, if you had like a little bit more insight into that whole meditation practice that you've been doing for the past 13 years.
Yeah. At this point, I have hundreds of students. I've had hundreds of students. I only take a few private students at once, just because of the nature of the energy. It's really intense. And my bandwidth, unfortunately, is limited as a human being. But I can't remember the question. You wanted to know...
Like, just what is the process? Like, how does somebody... Like, if somebody wanted to get started out with Tantra meditation, what would they do?
Tantra's a weird word because it's very, very misunderstood. When people hear the word Tantra, they think spiritual sexuality. And to a degree it is, because sexuality is under the umbrella of the human experience. But Tantra comes from two root words in Sanskrit, tan and tra, which means to weave and to expand. Right? So the practice of Tantra is the practice of expanding and weaving your energy with the cosmos, using a very specific set of practices and, techniques. I work threefold, right? We've heard everyone's heard mind, body, spirit. I literally work on all three of those levels. This is why it's such a beautiful practice, because it's holistic. It works on the whole essence of the being, not just your body, mind, and spirit, but also like all the layers, right? They call them koshas. Right? Koshas are the different layers of energy in the yogic texts, and Tantra works on all of these levels. So I almost always start with strengthening the core. So I have whole programs and courses on strengthening your core from the inside out. Very few people have a strong core, right? And I mean, even athletes, right? Even though athletes have a deep connection with your body, to really be connected to your true core is something you can only do with very specific exercises, both physical and breath related, right? There's muscles in your body that can only be targeted through certain breathing practices, right? And when you target these through the breathing, through the physical activation, through the meditation, you don't just strengthen the physical core, but the energetic core. And the core is literally who you are. People with weak cores are weak people. They have a weak sense of self, they don't have emotional control, and they don't know where the hell they're going. Right? People who are grounded in this sense of purpose, grounded in who they are, they have strong cores. So I always address that first, because the core is not only the center of who you are, but it is this, right? It's your lower centers, and the lower centers is where all the shadows are, right? It's where all the darkness is, and most people are afraid of the dark, especially their own darkness. And everybody has a shadow, right? So this work seeks to address that through various physical practices. So I always start with that, addressing the physical. And on the surface, this is the thing, the exercises look really basic, because they are. Right? All you need are basics. The best practices in the world, in my opinion, are simple. Right? It takes a genius to make something complicated simple. Right? And I'm not calling myself a genius by any means, but what I can tell you is that my exercises are very simple. They're very basic, but it's the basics done with accountability over a consistent amount of time that create extraordinary results. Right? So I always address the core. I always address basic breathing exercises. It's about the container, right? Being consistent and being steady, and showing up for yourself on a day-to-day basis. That is the way to go. And then the deeper you go, right, the more you start to understand how this energy works. You start to play with it and really let it blossom in you, and you see your whole life flourish as a result. Your relationships, your bank account, your art, everything starts to flourish because there's more of life inside you. This is a practice of life cultivation. Whenever you were born, there was, boom, a huge surge of life just exploded in this, inside of you within this dimension. And these practices allow you to manipulate that. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, right? But like, allow you to find that energy and really work with it so you can blossom. This is every human being's birthright, is to be able to blossom in this way. So yeah, start with the core, move into the breathing, and then we move into stillness and reflection and meditation. And it's a pretty sweet formula. Saved my life countless times.
In what ways exactly would you say it saved your life?
Well, the first way it saved my life was, in the story I told you earlier, just being a very, very intense person, addicted to substances, addicted to very reckless lifestyle. After the fight, right, even though I had kind of stopped doing a lot of substances, I didn't stop partying, right? I still wanted to express, and I still party, right? I still from time to time take substances, but I have a relationship with them that is much more sophisticated and intelligent and refined than it was when I was 20. You know what I mean? I think that just comes as you age, but it also comes with studying centering practices. So as I started to dive into this work, my desire for these substances just kind of dropped off in a healthy way. Right? And I started to rewire my relationship with these substances. So in that first foremost regard, it saved my life. I'm an overthinker. I think way too much. And I'm a very emotional guy. Very emotional. I feel very, very deeply. Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy, because I wonder if everybody just feels as intensely as I do. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe I'm not.
I feel like everybody's a little crazy.
Yeah, everyone's a little crazy, but I know that some people have a deeper capacity to feel emotion, according to certain personality tests and psychology studies that I've read. I think I'm definitely on the far end of that spectrum. It's like the really deep feelers, really intense thinkers. And there's been times when, I've been homeless twice. You know what I mean? I've traveled across the world, lived in multiple different states and countries, and that stuff's really hard. You know what I mean? I've had some really intense romantic relationships that left me feeling on the verge, right? And then the most intense thing I can think of is my brother passing away. He died about 3 years ago. And that changed me for sure. And I remember that first year was really hard. And I remember my DJ career was taking off in a certain regard. And I was working a lot, and there was relationship problems with my partner at the time, and I was dealing with grief. And I remember there was this one day where I was like, God, I can't do this. Like, I don't know if I didn't want to kill myself, right? I've never wanted to kill myself, and I will never kill myself. But I remember thinking, if I stopped living, I don't know if I would care anymore. I don't care. I'm like okay with not living anymore. And I remember this one day I had like a 5-hour DJ gig, and my partner had left town. Her and I were not on good terms, and I was just like this some of the saddest I'd ever been. I'm trying to think if there's a time that I was more sad than that day, and I can't think of one. And I remember finishing my gig, just barely scraping by that, still performed, right? Went to the gym, and I started doing my work. Started throwing heavy weights around. I started breathing. I started moving my body. I sat in some heat, right? Got in the steam room, got in some cold water. And then I went to like a private room at the gym, and I started doing some mantra and some breathing. And I just kept working the energy, kept working the energy, kept working the energy, kept working the energy. And I was in such a desperate place, and didn't call anyone for help. Right? Didn't reach out to anybody and cry and complain. I just sat with myself, and I sat with my practices. And something happened. I can't explain what happened, but I remember there was this point where I was chanting, I was meditating, and it almost felt like there was this like not, it's hard to explain, but there's something was like moving up, and I felt like it moved up and out of my head, and before I knew it, I was unconscious. Right? I'm not sure how long I was unconscious for. It probably wasn't that long. It's probably like 20, 30 minutes. But when I woke up, the sadness was gone. It's just gone. And I had been dealing with this grief for months. You know what I mean? It was just like gone. And I still grieve him, obviously. I to a degree, I hope that never goes away, because it's the strongest emotion, old tie that I still have to him. But that wave of it was gone, right? And I had the best fucking, like, the next month of my life, I was like floating. It was weird. So it's a very powerful tool for grief. And in that regard, it also saved my life. And I can just think of so many times like that. That was the most intense one, but there's been at least half a dozen to a dozen more times, intense experiences like that, where I've just turned to my chanting, turned to my breathing, turned to my body, saved my life. If I didn't have that, I'd probably be dead. You know?
Yeah.
Because it's for deep feelers, it becomes almost unbearable. You carry the weight of your own pain and pain from past lives and pain from the world. I just sit in meditation sometimes and I feel the pain of the world. I'm like, my God, there's so much suffering, and just carrying the weight of that on my shoulders, right? It's too much. So if we don't have something we can turn to on a daily basis to purge and move that energy through, it's too much. You won't make it. I think that's why these practices exist.
Yeah.
I think that's why they were invented. Because the world is intense, it's heavy, it's dense, and that's the point. It's like going to the gym. You go to the gym to lift up heavy things. You want the intensity, you want the suffering. You want to pick up heavy shit because the strain and the tension builds you as a person. We all come to this world. It's the densest place in the universe, according to the Seekers. They talk about the third dimension as being the densest place in the universe, because our souls need that density to stretch so that our souls can breathe and expand into a new form that otherwise would not have been accessed without that intensity. It's like the spiritual gym, right? So Tantra is like, it's like the breath of fresh air after your set. And like recovering in the steam room and like, stretching out. It's like that the aspects of the workout that are restorative, but also build you up and help you to move energy through your system so you can navigate through life. Because life is about enjoying it. Right? I think Churchill said, it's not life that's worth living, it's good life. Good life is worth living. Not life, good life. Right? And you can only live a good life if you have awareness. And you can only have awareness if you go out of your way to make sure that these centering practices are a key part of your life. Right? The ayahuasqueros say you need two things, right? You need light and you need force, also known as Shiva Shakti, right? Also known as masculine, feminine, right? We live in a world of duality. So you need awareness, right? Light, and you need energy, force. And these centering practices give you both. Right? In my experience, Tantra gives you both. So for that reason, I'm a forever devotee.
And do you do chanting with your...
I do. Yeah.
So you have your own, like... You don't need to share it or anything like that, but you have your own chant that you
I can
found
share
out.
whatever you want.
Well,
yeah, it's not secret. Some people keep their mantras secret. I'm not like that.
That's what is there a reason for that you're aware of, why some people keep their mantras secret?
Yeah, I mean, I think some mantras are meant to be secret, but the mantras I chant are in books. They're all in those books right there.
Yeah.
You can get them on Amazon. So it's like, but yeah, I don't keep them secret. I don't think there's any point.
Because then do you know how to read and speak Sanskrit then, or just?
I can do basics. I know what basics mean and basics sound like. Sanskrit's very complex, and I unfortunately don't have the time to dive into that. But yeah, chanting's a huge part of my practice. I like chanting because, as a musician, I am an absolute sound nerd. Like sound is my thing, and it's like almost a more dynamic, more fun, vibrant form of meditation. The mantra that I use, that I told you about earlier in that story, it's a moving mantra, right? So the mantra moves through the chakras, and the lineage that I practice is so powerful because we aim to make the body the temple, right? And in the more advanced forms of this practice, you actually will take the syllables of the mantra and touch parts of the body, either with your mind or physically with your hand or certain body parts, and you'll activate the body parts. The body parts contain a lot of energy, and with enough momentum, it like kind of cracks open and the energy floods through you, and now you have this reservoir of energy that you can use to create and to move things through. So what happened in that moment for that story when the thing moved out, I was using this mantra, moving energy through, and I was able to move, like massage through my soul, through my energy body, this energy through me in a way that saved me, right? So mantra is a huge part of my practice. It's a lot of fun.
Have you found it's better to repeat it out loud or like internally? Like, are you always?
It depends. I like to like kind of do it at a murmur. You know what I mean? Where it's like when you do it at a murmur, I find like the humming aspect of it adds a really nice. It like speeds up the meditative process. Like it allows me to enter meditation quicker, and it just feels nice, right? The vibration feels nice. But not so loud to where you're distracting yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard there's some subtleties too, like when you murmur it compared to actually physically speaking it, because it's like nobody else can hear it other than yourself. So there's apparently more potency to it.
Right.
But I've never I'm fairly new to it, so like I've always just done the meditation where I just sit in silence and just watch my breath. Like that's what I always did.
Yeah.
But when we first met, I was telling you that I started doing more like the third eye practices, which that's been like a game changer, dude. And now I've been doing more of I don't know the exact meditation, but like I sit on my perineum, and it's just like I sit on that, and then
you sit on your perineum.
Kind of like with my left.
I was
foot.
gonna say everybody sits on their perineum. Yeah, so you put the heel in the mula
right
bandha.
on the taint basically.
On the taint.
On the taint to get that under there, but then my foot always falls asleep, which I don't know if you found out ways around.
Yeah.
That.
So I'll give you a tip right now. So if you take a blanket, let's pretend this is a blanket, and you just put a fold in it like this. And you put your taint right on that. And that way you can sit in Siddhasana or whatever, and you have that little pressure there.
Yeah.
Yeah. What works best, though, is just resting your attention on it. You rest your attention on it, and if you chant slightly audibly, that humming helps a lot.
Yeah. Because that's what I like, the Om. People always say like you chant Om basically, and they want to get the vocals, but it's more about the vibration from my understanding. It kind of sounds the same thing for your mantras as well that you're doing. Is like, it's not necessarily the sound itself. It's more just the vibration that I feel within my body to kind of hopefully maybe like get the things that are like, I visualize it as like I'm on a shelf or like I'm like one of those great shaders, you know, like with like the dirt and the rocks, like you're panning for gold or something like that. I think like the vibrations are like shaking those out of my own body basically, so that then I can release.
Have you seen, these are all over the internet now, a guy will take what is it called? A cello? You know those like the rods, the bows, and they'll like run it across a metal sheet with sand or certain crystals, and the vibration from the bow will formulate a sacred geometrical pattern. Have you seen those?
No,
you haven't seen that?
Those, no,
dude. So they'll. There's a bunch of ways you can do it. That was just one way, but they'll blast a certain frequency or a tone into a randomly scattered array of particles, whether rocks, crystals, sand, whatever, and then the sand will formulate into like patterns. And the higher the vibration, the more complex the patterns become. Right? So that's really what it's doing. It's like that's a good way to put it. Like you're kind of panning for gold.
Yeah.
But imagine now the gold formulates into patterns too, right? Because it's like you're aligning with energy. Because I don't know if you've ever taken psychedelics, but
a couple of times, yeah.
When you take psychedelics, you see through the veil, right? Psychedelics they're like training wheels, right? They kind of like allow you to see past the density, and they allow you to see the architecture, the energetic architecture underlying the third dimension. Right? Spiritual practices help to bring you in alignment with this architecture. You're more in alignment. The yogis would chant a certain amount of times, do a certain amount of sun salutations, a certain amount of rounds of breathing, because it was associated with numbers that were aligned with astronomical alignment. So you're aligning with the planets, you're aligning with natural rhythms of nature. And that's what yoga does. It brings you back into alignment with nature. And that's the most powerful thing there is, right? It's being in line with nature. So that's what chanting does, and chanting is actually a very safe way to wake up. Right? It might be the safest, because when you're chanting at a murmur, right, this vibration starts to wake something up in you, and over a period of months, years, decades, it just builds up all this momentum, and then it allows you to kind of like sift through that gold, right? You burn through the impurities of the body and mind. Pranayama, also known as breath work, is actually one of the more explosive ways to wake up. So it could be quicker, but it could also be dangerous, right? So it's important to make sure that you never force anything, especially your breath. Never force your breath. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of awakening, according to the yogis.
Because when you say awake, I have my own perspective on that, but I'm curious as to what your perspective and realization as to like becoming awake is, because I've talked with other people as well too, and they're like, "Oh, I'm awake now," but it's just like I feel like everybody has different, slight definitions.
Yeah, there's so many levels. I mean, I'm not fully all the way there, whatever that means. I don't think we ever
fully get
Yeah,
there.
I think according to the masters, about 2% of the population at any given time do make it all the way, where there's just like, there's a full enlightenment. I honestly have no idea what that means or what that looks like. But I would imagine it's like a total understanding of reality as it is, such that there's no more secrets. Like you just really just understand, and you're so in love with the pure creation that God has placed before us that you're in bliss. That's what I would imagine is full awakening. However, there's many awakenings along your path. I've certainly experienced many, but the main one was like in the beginning when I went to that festival, and then when I experienced my first breathing session. Like that all happened within the year. Something happened. I also started taking psychedelics around that time. So like a lot happened at once, and I was like, oh, there's more to life than just like getting a degree and getting a mortgage and then, retiring. You know what I mean? Like there's actually something to be done. There's a path, right? There's something I'm here for. And it became very clear in that moment. That's one thing that I think might be unique to my path. I don't know if people figure that out right away, but it was very clear to me in that moment, 12, 13 years ago. I was like, this is what I'm here to do.
Just crazy. It's like I feel like I've talked with buddies before of mine too, where like we would talk about this during COVID all the time. It's like I have no idea how people just find their passion basically, but it sounds like you, up until 21-ish or so, like you didn't know what you were doing, but then something just clicked one day. Yeah. It's like, all right, this is it. Yeah.
And the way it's unfolding is still a mystery, and will continue to be, but the overall theme is pretty clear.
Yeah. And I also wanted to, like, when we were talking to, circling back a little bit to the sands and the vibrations and everything like that, with you doing music yourself, have you ever, like, experimented with trying to create those things as well? Because I know we were talking about energies and vibrations and sound, so it's like everything's almost connected on a certain level in playing, and it's just a matter of finding the right vibrations or the right frequencies to be able to get that energy to the right level so that then you vibrate with the right audience at the right time. But it's a matter of like finding those specific moments in time to be able to create that said like event. Like when I think of going to a show or something like that, the reason why certain artists I feel like resonate with me is because like they're speaking to a deeper part of my soul, and somehow they use the energies and the wavelengths from the music to be able to speak to me on a deeper level, like in the core essence of my being. But it's just like, I don't know if you've ever thought about that or experimented with that yourself personally at all or not, but I just find that kind of like fascinating. If you can find the right frequency, then you can kind of like travel, as you were talking about earlier too, around the manifestation. It's like you find the right frequency, then it just starts to become a lot quicker in a certain regard.
Are you talking about like binaural beats kind of thing, where they're using like healing frequencies and healing tones?
Yeah, kind of, because I figured that was kind of the same reference to like the other thing as well too.
To a degree, I follow the enthusiasm when it comes to music. I don't try to scientifically dissect and bring in like 528 tones. And I mean, honestly, I see a lot of people doing that, and I don't mean to like, I don't mean to shit on anybody, but honestly, a lot of it seems really tacky to me. And I'm just like, all right, whatever makes you happy, I'm just going to follow what makes me happy, right? And I just follow the enthusiasm, because when I listen to the masters talk about creativity, right, especially musical creativity, they say whatever sparks the most excitement is probably the most important thing to be working on. It's a heart-centered feeling and emotion and path. Creativity is a function of the heart. The heart is the creative center. Right? This is the quantum portal right here. Everything below that is more earthly. Right? As soon as you get up here, this is where you actually can connect to other dimensions. So that's why creativity feels so elusive, because it comes out of nowhere. Right? So the more you live in your heart space, as a creative my whole life and as a practitioner and teacher, I've realized that they go hand in hand, right? Being in your heart helps you be way more creative. My music tastes change when I'm really in my heart. Like what I listen to on Spotify changes a lot when I'm really in my heart versus like in my core, or like in my head. So when I follow the excitement, thankfully that's not hard for me. I'm just an excited guy all the time, right? Just like passionate guy. But the excitement is the compass, right? So that's what I use as a beacon to like to find what I should really be putting out in the world. You know what I mean? Attention span is too short to be messing around with anything else. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I'd say so. And I know this wasn't really on like the questions that I had, but it kind of just like popped into my head.
Dude, ask away, bro. We're here to.
And I kind of
here to riff.
There was a whole, it was this whole thing too. It just escaped my mind for a second, but I had it. This is the weird thing. So it's like I'll create something and I'll have something as well too, like you do, where it's just like just things like they just come out of nowhere. Like we don't know where it comes from, but somehow it just pops into our minds and then it comes back. And for the longest time, I always grew up being told, and you were talking about this earlier too, around like how you felt crazy for feeling the intense emotions that you feel and like having this like deep intrinsic like grief and like feeling sad and sorrow. And it's just like, I had that, I've been experiencing that myself as well for a certain period of time. But like growing up, it was always told like, don't listen to your heart. Like always go with like how you think. And I think the churches as well have told you that as well too. Like don't listen to your heart, like go off of like what you're thinking instead. But it's like, I feel like the heart, as you're saying, like it opens up this whole new dimension that we didn't originally have. Like it creates this new reality that we never experienced. And I've always been curious is like, do people tell you not to follow your heart because they truly understand the true potential of what your heart can bring? And they're afraid of like what will happen if you actually start listening to yourself instead of like listening to everything on the outside of yourself. Because like I've found so much more, and I was talking with this girl too that's also creative, and she's like, you wear your heart on your sleeve. And I was like, I've never really pictured that as myself, but after she said that, I was like, yeah, I kind of do. Because I just love everybody. I want to see everybody thrive and succeed in the areas that they're in. As long as they're like truly passionate about what they do, like I can usually typically sense that in some regard. And I've thought I've been crazy in those aspects too. But it's always fascinated me is just like, why are we told not to listen to our heart? Like, where does that come from? Like, oh, just go do the thing that like you think you need to do. But it's like, I've come to realize it's better to go do the thing that feels right in this specific moment. There's sometimes where I'm like, I'm not going to go do this. And I'm like, how come? It's like, I just don't feel like it. People are like, what do you mean you don't feel like it? Like, it's the right thing to do. And it's like, it's not like for me. So it's like, I've always just kind of been curious. And I don't know if you run into that as well too, where like you've listened to your heart, but it's kind of like bitten you in the back sometimes, but it's also like the main thing that kind of keeps you going.
Yeah.
Cause like, I mean, that's the thing that keeps me going is like the love and the inspiration and like hopefully helping somebody else come over, because I feel like love's at the center of everything. But it's like people disregard that from time to time. So it's like trying to find that aspect of like, when do you listen to your heart versus like when do you actually listen to your head? And I don't know if meditation has helped you out in that
Yeah.
way at all.
Yeah, great question. So I'll start with something my teacher said. One of my teachers, she told me, and I think she was pulling this from a book, so I can't remember what book this is from, but I heard it from her. And she said, people have made the mind the king, right? The king that sits on the throne. But the mind is actually the servant. The mind is the servant of the system, like the human. The heart is the king and should be sitting on the throne. So imagine you're trying to run a kingdom with a servant sitting on the throne. How do you think shit's going to turn out? Right? You have someone who isn't equipped with the wisdom to run a kingdom sitting on the throne. That's the mind, right? Because the mind is divisive, the mind is analytical, the mind chops up tasks into smaller tasks and processes and is very linear, right? The heart is just a vibration of knowing, right? And the heart actually has neurons. Right? I think they did a study where the heart actually has more neurons than the brain does, right? And I can't remember if I'm butchering this or not, but Heart Math Institute did a bunch of studies on this, and they showed like there's a massive collection of neurons, right? Like brain cells, like in your heart. I hope I'm quoting that correctly, but the point is like there is a wisdom that sits in the heart, and because of life's intensities, it causes us to close. Because feeling is really, really intense, right? We've all had our heart broken. We've all been disappointed. We've all been let down. Most of us, if not all of us, have been betrayed, right? I certainly have. And it's hard to keep just like moving through the world with an open heart when you've had so much pain happen to you. So it forces you to close down. So that's why it's a daily practice of surrendering and opening and letting the heart just really blossom open. And you do this many ways, but the most simple and practical way that I've found is literally just by breathing into and resting your awareness in the heart space. You do that for a certain amount of time, things start to shift, right? And you feel it. You feel it in your day-to-day. You're less stressed, you're less anxious, you're less analytical. Yeah, and I think that the goal is to unite both of them, right? It's called heart-brain coherence. Have you heard of this term?
It's familiar. I'm a little familiar with it, but people watching, they might not necessarily know, so might as well elaborate.
So heart-brain coherence, and I'm no expert on paper per se. I have spent thousands of hours doing this myself, however. So what I can say from my experience is it's when the energies of the heart and the energies of the head are doing this little infinity loop thing where they're just connected, right? So you have the cognitive functions of the brain operating through the wise lens and filter of the heart. That's the goal, because you can't live without the head, right? You just like, you need it, right? You can't live without your heart, you need it. So it's about combining the energies of the two in a way that makes you functional, but also compassionate, but also creative, but also effective. You know what I mean? It's a lot. But this is, again, the thing. Like, it's about making it simple, a complicated thing simple. The way you make it simple is just move your body, right? Get grounded. Tether yourself to the world with this body. Meditate on the heart space and breathe into the heart space, and then something clicks, right? What we talked about earlier with the cube that just melts. You sit long enough, something happens, and everything in the brain just settles and locks, and then you feel coherent.
Do you think race plays a role in that at all? Like, I know you said you're a Christian at the beginning, or grew up in a Christian household. Do you think race plays that clicking aspect, or do you think there's something else?
Do you think race or religion?
Grace. Like grace. Do you think race?
Oh, grace.
Yeah. GRACE.
I think the fact that we're here is grace by itself. But then also, and I don't mean to get like super woo.
I like the woo-woo stuff.
But like, what seems to make the most sense is that we've done this before.
Yeah.
Like, probably hundreds, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times.
100%.
And it's like when you step into, the sporting arena. Like if you ever played soccer or tennis or whatever, it's like, I played tennis. So like, let's say I practice hard for 2 hours, right? I leave, I come back the next day. Because I put in the work yesterday, I'm a little bit better today, hopefully. And I think if everything is cyclical and runs on patterns in that way, why wouldn't existence and life be the same way? It just makes more sense. It doesn't make sense that we're just like plopped on this earth and we have memories of things we can't explain, and people come into our life that seem to have personalities that you can't explain, and habits, and you know what I mean? Like I've heard so many stories about babies being born that have the same personality, the same laugh, the same like, you know, sort of weird tendencies that someone who had deceased had before they were born. You have ascended masters like Christ and Buddha who just like have all these gifts. It's like it makes sense to me that they'd done this before and that we've done this before. So I forgot what the original question was that you asked.
It was around grace basically and like
Grace,
meditation. Yeah. But where you're going is actually a better way, because I kind of wanted to go down that route as well too. So,
yeah.
Because there's this whole like child prodigies is a prime example. It's just like, how did this person come to be
right.
like without having any prior experience?
Right. So according to the tantric texts, right, people who are prodigies have already awakened kundalinis, but the kundalinis are being expressed through a certain center, through a certain filter that gives that aspect of their life a certain amount of power. Right? If you think about like a Michael Jackson, right, who's just a freaking prodigy, right? His energy, his sleeping potential, kundalini is just another word for sleeping potential. Right? Everybody has a cherry blossom inside of them, but most people stay in the germinated form, right? They don't have the right soil, they don't have the right water, they don't have the right sunshine. The breath, the embodiment, the meditation, that's the water, that's the sunshine, that's the soil. You feed the nutrients to the tree, the cherry blossom comes out. And a full cherry blossom, right, is an awakened kundalini, if we were to use analogies. Child prodigies, according to the texts, are people who had a little bit extra soil, a little bit extra water already, but that doesn't mean they're balanced, right? We've heard so much about the tortured artists, right, and artists who just like, they because they feel so deeply and they're so sensitive, they have to numb pain with substances, with sex, and with all these like crazy things that throw them off kilter. Right? So my aim as an embodied artist is to offer practices to the artist community and to the world, because they work the same. Right? The creative process is the same. It doesn't matter what you do. So that we can be fully embodied artists and be creative and be balanced, right? Because that's what I am, right? I'm somebody who is dedicated to these practices, and it's saved my life and it's made my art better. But, you know, long story short, the prodigies are these people who had just that little bit of extra upon birth. And hopefully along their journey, they find something that helps them stabilize. Because Kundalini energy is very intense and often destabilizing. A lot of these people that you see running, you know, walking the streets, unfortunately, believe it or not, are awake, but there's no stability. So they're schizophrenic and manic, and because it's an awakening of energy, right? It's like you have an electrical wire with no grounding, right? The electricity is going to spray everywhere, and it actually becomes dangerous at that point. It becomes harmful to the person and to the environment and the people around that person. So this is why it's literally been broken down to a science over thousands of years. Like these books, they have it nailed to a science, because over thousands of lifetimes, right? These masters have spent thousands and thousands of hours, written it down, passed it off to their students. They did what they did, thousands of hours, wrote it down, passed it off over and over and over. And it's like science. It's science, right? It's like a mystical science. So that's why I trust those kind of books over dogma, because it's like they're always aiming to prove themselves wrong with more experience and more research. And you are the research, you are the data, and you are also the scientist. That's what a mystic is, right? With a little bit of crazy in there and a flair for the mystery, right? So, yeah, good questions.
Yeah, dude, it's a fun thing, and we can wrap it up after here if you want to.
As long as you want, man.
So there's the whole thing like with the yogic texts and meditation, like all these different aspects, because it's like there probably are a lot of people out there that are, like you're saying, awake and they have the energies, and it's just like it's an ungrounded wire basically. And there's this whole concept that I've come into mind with as well. I don't know. It's kind of like if you think about See, and I lost this as well too. But it's one of those things where like when you have something, it kind of creates something new in regards. So it's like our minds have the potential to jump back in time, but they can also jump forward. But it's like we're here right now. And it's an idea that I've been exploring, and maybe you've felt it yourself as well too. But it's like the moments that we have right now, like how do we know that these moments are like this is what's happening? For all we know, like we could technically jump back like through meditation. I don't know if you've had this experience, but like I've had meditations where like I go back into like childhood experiences or things that I had as a youth, and it's as if I'm living that exact same moment at that exact same time, but it's like I'm here. So it's like, how do I know? This kind of ties into the manifestation thing as well too, like with your future and like seeing that path that you're talking about, like with the tunnel walking down. It's like if we have these innate abilities inside of us, but like we're told to suppress them because we don't allow our heart to speak, we don't allow our heart to go into like the places that we need to, it's very challenging for us to go down those paths. But I've come to realize it's just like if we just accept that like maybe time is non-linear and we can jump forward and backwards at any time but still be in the present moment, it's almost like we create this whole new reality that never existed in the first place. It's kind of challenging, but it's like explaining this to somebody that doesn't get it is kind of like it just goes right over their head. But I've come to realize that that's like how it is with information. Like the stuff that you're telling me now, like if you told me this 5 years ago, I would have been like, what are you talking about? Like it just would have gone right over my head. But like you have to have those different teachers. You have to read those different books, connect those different ideas in different ways. And that's where I feel like having those child prodigies and those different aspects and those different memories that you were talking about too, that just kind of like pop into our head. It's just like, where do they come from? Clearly they came from somewhere else. Do they come from a future aspect of ourselves that decided to tap into our own creative being to create something new? Or do they come out of thin air? Because it's like the Wright brothers is something that always comes to mind. Like they came up with the idea of creating a plane. But it's like, where do they come up with the idea of creating a plane?
Right.
The yogis as well. I love them more because they don't go into the dogma and telling you like, hey, look outside of you for all the solutions. Because I've come to realize that it's just like everything that I need is within myself. Like everybody tells you like, oh, look outside, look at this, go read this, go study this. And it's like, it's good to do that. But like at the end of the day, like you have all the answers within inside of you. I've come to that realization. I don't know if you've come to that realization as well too, but it's just interesting seeing how this whole world like works in a non-linear manner. And there's a really good movie. If you haven't watched it, I'd highly recommend Arrival. It's
called Rival?
Arrival. Yeah. So it's like, it's around aliens and they come to Earth and there's this whole like concept. It's fantastic. Highly recommend it. But like it's around like how time's non-linear, kind of like how you were talking about as like we have multiple different lifetimes. Another movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. I don't know if you've seen that at all.
Haven't, but I heard about it.
That's another good one as well too, where it's like people are jumping from different realities into different beings. Yeah. I've had friends that have told me that exact same thing too, where like he took ecstasy and like he passed out and like he went down this whole different route and he woke up and like everything that he once knew to be true no longer existed.
Right.
And I'm like, it's probably because you just jumped into different realities. And like we have these essence and these people that pass away. And I was talking to my mom about this the other day too, is like we had to put our dog down and I was like, she got another dog and I was like, it's basically the other dog that you just had as like another kid in a sense. Like the soul from the old dog just came into the new dog into the body because like Newton's second or third law, I believe, like you can't create nor destroy energy.
Right.
So like everything has to come back at a certain point in time. Right. Another movie, Man Called Otto, and then I'll wrap it up and I'll ask you a question after this. But like basically A Man Called Otto, there's another aspect too where it's just like there's a cat and you come to find out that like the cat is someone special to him later in the movie because it's like the energies decide to plant into that other person. And as you were talking about earlier as well as like there's like certain people that you run into, certain people that you meet, certain conversations that you have, it almost feels as if you're talking to somebody that you know. It's strange, but it's kind of ties back to that awakening aspect. Like you're talking to somebody as if you've known them for a lifetime, but you just met them for the first time. And it's like, how does this happen? And I feel like that's where that soul connection and like those soul aspects come into play because you get to see things that you never originally saw when you actually get to talk with that person. You sit down and have this conversation. Kind of ties back to karmic debts and karma in a certain way, shape, or form. But it's just like our energies are always going to be on the same wavelength kind of as music as well too. Like when you vibrate at the same frequency eventually, and there's a meme where it's just like you'll see different waves like going up and down, but then once they get on the same path, it's like all of a sudden it's just like one specific line. And I feel like that's how it is with a lot of spirituality and awakening and like meditation and listening to your heart space and doing all these different aspects, because it's just you tapping into past lives or future lives and then deciding like, do I want to take this route or do I want to take this route? And it just kind of really depends on like which path you want to take to find the most fulfillment. But it's like you said too at the beginning, like once you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you just stay focused on that one thing, and whatever else distractions that come in, women, drugs, other things that come into your vision or your world, like just be like, I'm sorry, like I'm focused on this one thing, and if people don't like it, they don't like it. But you got to take your path and follow that path to the T, regardless of what anybody else is saying. Because I've even talked with other dudes too, is they say those things like, you won't be able to find this amount of success, whatever it may be, but it's like people turn on you like that, and it sucks. But it's like when you know what you want to do in your life, which from what I've been able to gather so far, it sounds exactly like you know what you want to do. Just a matter of taking those steps and realizing that like we are infinite creative beings, and it's a matter of finding those aspects within us to truly like share our light that we have with the world. And I know that's something that you're doing right now, and it's something that you'll continue doing for the rest of your life, which I admire that, man. It's courageous, dude. It's cool.
Thank you, man. That's very big of you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Very kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dude,
I think
Terrence McKenna said it best. Nature loves courage.
true.
We are a product of courage, right? Whatever evolutionary leaps we had to take to, gather our tribe, uproot, and move continents over and over and over again. You see it in the species that, they came out of the water, they moved into this forest, they left the canopies into the savanna. Like, it all takes courage and curiosity, and consciousness itself is curious. There's that saying, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, right? I have another verse that I say myself, for God so loved the world, it became flesh.
Yeah.
As the ultimate love for itself. It wanted to experience the world through human eyes. So it became flesh. Because apparently the human experience is the ultimate experience. We have everything sitting just right? Sitting on this rock that's just right. Just the perfect distance from the sun and the moon and the stars, to have the seasons, to have green, to taste chocolate, to experience the warmth of another's flesh, to experience the bliss of learning something new. I don't know. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
No, I mean the emotions kind of, like you were saying earlier too, they're a little overwhelming from time to time, but like that's what consciousness decided to experience.
Yeah.
Maybe you've read it in one of the books too, like there's those three levels. Like I don't know if you've heard of that at all or not. Like how there's like the matter, so like we are matter, then there's the energy, like the music, the vibrations that you feel, but then at the top it's just pure consciousness. And it's hard for some people to understand, but it's like once you get that grasp that it's just pure consciousness, and you are essence, and you and I, like, we're on the same wavelength, like, there's a part in here, and maybe, yeah. Sometimes, like, I don't know if you've ever, like, telepathy or things like that, where, like, you'll see or hear something, and then all of a sudden, it's like you follow that intuition, and it's, like, leads you to be something true. Happens all the time. It's just a matter of, like, creating that and being aware, like you were talking about with the breath work and the meditation. I just find those things very insightful and fascinating, but it takes years, as you were saying too, like with the masters of the 2%, like very few people find these things. But once you do, it's just like going back to those basics, making it as simple as you possibly can. Because maybe you've run into this from your meditation practices and maybe other students that you've taught, where it's like they overcomplicate it to a certain regard. But it's like, you got to keep it simple. Like,
gotta keep it simple.
When I go to the gym, I do the same lift every single day. Jackie Chan said, "Is I don't fear the man that punched 1,000 times. It's like fear the man that practiced the one punch 1,000 times type of thing." People just overcomplicate things, and I've never got that whole aspect.
That's a function of the mind, right? Which is why practices of the heart and body are so valuable in this day and age, because the heart is simple. It's a simple energy. You just sit. The heart is the solvent that unites everything. Right? The mind is always cutting things up. And the heart really is the body. Right? When you sit in your heart, it's like in the center of your body. So the heart is the body, and the body is very grounding, being in your body. When you're grounded, everything's simple. Everything makes more sense because you're not up here. One of my favorite techniques for relieving anxiety is doing squats. Doing leg work.
Yeah.
Right? Little thrusting bridges, anything that activates your glutes, especially your quads. It feels like anything that's floating up here goes, and it comes down. You're in your body now. Right? It's like you're overthinking shit. Okay, just do some squats. Relax. Take a breath. So it becomes a daily thing. It has to be. Otherwise, who knows?
Right? It's great. Awesome, man. I appreciate that. Unless you got anything else that you want to add or anything like that, I feel like we can probably wrap it up here if that's good for you.
To any of you who are interested in being better, whether that's a version of yourself, better creator, better spiritual practitioner, a better lover, a better person, and you want techniques, practices, best practices, methods, I got a whole library of stuff, right, that I've been using for 12, 13 years. So feel free to reach out if you want to level up and see how your life blossoms as a result. That's it.
Awesome. Appreciate it, brother. Good time. Yeah, that's Diego, guys. Everything will be down in the description down below for you as well, too.